All right. Well, this has been an amazing morning. I've already cried a couple times. That's good. So this week, I'm going to be sharing on the art of something you maybe, if you hear the word, you sometimes feel a little prickly. So Chrissy, my wife, and I were traveling about 2 months ago. It was right after we came on staff here. And we went to Washington, D.C. for a wedding. And while we were traveling, we realized, okay, we're going to be doing a series called The Art of Community. Well, what are some elements of community? So we came up with some ideas. The art of conversation, that's part of community. We came together with some other ideas, and one of the ideas that came up was submission. And we kind of looked at each other like, oh boy, this could get interesting. And we were excited about it because we thought, you know what, a lot of us have heard the word submission and occasionally thought, it's kind of a dirty word. But we wanted to reclaim it because submission inherently is not a dirty word, but it's been used as a weapon many times over. And I don't know if you've experienced that before, but I have, and sometimes from the pulpit. So we don't want to do that today. Today we're going to take a healthy look at reclaiming and rethinking the art of submission. True strength lies in submission to something beyond ourselves. When I was a freshman in high school, I had played basketball, baseball, and football. I played football for 1 year in high school, 4 years of baseball, and 3 years of basketball. And you probably wouldn't believe this looking at me now, but when I was in 8th grade, I was the power forward on my basketball team. Yes, I really was. And I enjoyed it. And I had great coaches, and they told me exactly where I needed to be when. And I played that role well. But as I turned 15 and got into high school, I started noticing that my friends were growing taller than me. In fact, the height I am now is pretty much the height I was when I was a freshman in high school, if not even in 8th grade. And because of that, as they passed me, I began playing a different role on the basketball team. I became a point guard all of a sudden. And that's a big leap if you know basketball, from power forward to point guard. And I love shooting the ball. That was my favorite thing to do. I'm an Indiana Hoosier, by the way. So if you're an Indiana Hoosier and you like sports growing up, basketball was the thing. You grew up believing you were going to be a professional basketball player. And if you didn't do that, anything less was a disappointment to yourself. So I grew up playing outside. We lived in the middle of nowhere on a dirt road, 1 mile, the only house. And if you got out there on the wrong day, shooting hoops in the driveway, the wind was so strong because it was just a bare field, no trees, that you'd have to shoot the ball at kind of like a little bit of a compensation over to one side so it'd come over and possibly make it. And I got decent at doing that. And I loved it. After Indiana Hoosiers games, I'd go in the basement where we had another hoop, and I would relive the game. And if they lost, I would make sure they won this time. And I would narrate the whole thing. I was every player. And I loved it. And when I came into high school, I became a point guard. And a point guard is not meant to shoot the ball every time. And that was very hard for me because that's what I wanted to do. So I fought against it with everything I had, to the point where when I was a junior in high school and I had finished the year, I said, I'm not playing anymore. I didn't fit well in that position, but it wasn't because my coaches were wrong. It was because I wasn't willing to submit to the role that I was supposed to be playing. And had I submitted to the role, maybe I would have actually enjoyed it. Maybe I would have been more successful. Maybe I would have played my senior year, but I didn't. But we all know what it's like to find it hard to submit to certain things. Maybe that question, you asked me to do what? You want to go grocery shopping with me today? Why can't you go by yourself? I don't want to go grocery shopping. I had other plans today. Little stuff. Oh, it's your birthday today. You pick any restaurant you want, except for that one. There's no red meat there. I'm not a fan. But you know, in those small things, man, if you decide I'm not going to do that thing, you're going to have trouble. So sometimes we got to learn to just say, This is for you. I'm letting it go. That's a light thing, but what about heavier things? What about my family in Indiana deciding, oh man, we're going to move to Washington, D.C.? And I remember being on the phone with a phone interview with a pastor in Washington, D.C., and Chrissy afterwards said, you know, there are only two places I don't want to be, and that's Washington, D.C. and Iowa. Don't ask me why Iowa. There's really no reason, but that's where we ended up going. Took a plane flight out there, came home, looked at her, and she said, we're going, aren't we? I was like, I think so. But because of our decision collectively, mutually, to go to Washington, D.C., we would both say that those were 4 years that were some of the best years of our life. I call it like a 4-year degree in making friends family. That's how it went. And that prepared us for when I would get another phone interview 4 years later in 2015. And a church in Green Bay was looking for a worship pastor. And a few days later, I got on a plane, came here, came back, and Chrissy said, we're probably doing this, aren't we? And I was like, yes. And I'm a Bears fan, so I'm just going to apologize, maybe confess right now. I'm a Bears fan in Green Bay. So there's already a little bit of, oh no, we're going to Green Bay? This is, for me, that doesn't make sense. But Chrissy's family, they're a bunch of Packers fans, so I was used to that dynamic. And I will not wear, this is something I want you all to know, this is a philosophy of my own. I will not wear Bear stuff in public in Green Bay, out of respect for the city of Green Bay. In fact, I will wear Green Bay Packers shirts, and I have some that I have worn. So, because local, got to support local, community. That is the art of community. But you get to the point where I don't want to do this thing because I had other dreams and other visions and other hopes. I wanted to stay in Indiana. That's where my family is. But that's not what God had in plan, had in store. So we ended up in Washington, D.C., 4 years, to Green Bay. Now we've been here 4 years. And it's the best thing we've ever done to make the choice to stay. Because 2 years ago, I had an opportunity to go back to Indiana and lead a church there. And we thought for sure we were doing it. We were leaning hard to go. And we felt really torn about it because we had grown in some relationships here. And I got the call to go down there and do an interview, and they offered me the job. We came back to Green Bay and just looked at each other and thought, oh man, we're doing this, aren't we? But this time something was different. Because Saturday morning, the day after I had gotten the call that it was a go, I met with a friend who was struggling in their marriage. And I sat with him and I just shared part of my own story. I didn't give him any pieces of advice. I just shared part of my own story. And when it was done, he said, it's exactly what I needed to hear. And at that moment, I realized, oh man, I don't think I'm done here. Because I sat there and just listened to him pour his heart out. His concerns, his needs, his fears. And I realized I barely kind of know this guy. And for some reason, we have a connection. So I came home, and Chrissy and I looked at each other, and just like those other 2 times, except different, we said, we're staying, aren't we? And that shocked me. It shocked me to my core because we had leaned so heavily into going. That's where my family is. That's a promotion, And there's all these things you're thinking, and then, no, we're going to stay. We're not done here. There are people here that we are supposed to invest in. And one day later, I emailed Mark and said, Mark, I need to have lunch with you. And he's like, he told me this later, but he was freaking out. He's like, Andy doesn't do this. We hadn't invested a lot of time together, but on Tuesday morning, 3 days after this all went down, and I had called the church in Indiana and said, I'm not doing this. And they said, we already knew. That's cool. I had lunch with Mark over at Cheesecake Heaven or Haven or whatever it is. And Mark said, I've got this thing going on that I've been thinking about doing on Thursday nights. And I was wondering if you'd be interested in helping out. Flash forward 2 years, and here we are. And it's not just Thursday night. Didn't expect that to happen. Move across the city. We were up if y'all don't know this, we were up at a church in Howard, and now we're here. So we came here for that. That was a stepping stone to where we are right now, and we were meant to be here. I'm so glad to be in this place. And by the way, I know I said y'all, and I'm not from the South, but I did live in the country with farmers. For whatever reason, it's stuck in me. So deal with it. All right, so we know what it's like to submit. And we know how hard it can be, but what is it like when we submit to other people's ideas? What is it like when we submit to other people's hopes and dreams and their needs and their fears? Now, there's a lady, her name is Sister Joan Chittister, and I met her, and Chrissy and I met her at St. Norbert, and she's world-renowned for her work in justice and in fighting for the rights of the weaker ones. And she held my face. We went through line, and she held my face and said, "You're the dad. Thank you." And I was just like, what's going on? But it was so powerful. She held my face. She looked me in the eyes, and it was like she opened herself up and gave me dignity in that moment. And what if we could be like that? She has a quote that's so good, and it's a little long, so bear with me. It says, "Submission to the will of God requires me to release my rabid devotion to self-will. The entire world, the whole universe, is the treasure house of the will of God, the mind of God for us all. This room, you people. It means that when I find myself liking my ideas and plans better than others, struggling to impose them, cutting people off in the middle of conversation, the caution light will go on in my heart. I'll begin to think again, except this time not about my own dreams and desires, but about the will and the desires and plans and visions and needs and hopes of other people, not simply my own." And then the last thing she says is humility and submission is the virtue of liberation from self-tyranny. I'll say it again. So humility and submission is the virtue of liberation from the tyranny of self. Freedom from self. Freedom from selfishness. Humility and submission. And I love that. I might be getting a little ring. You hear that? So I was looking through and thinking about different stories in the Bible, and the story that came up to me was Esther. Queen Esther. And I'm not going to read anything out of that chapter, out of that book, but what I'm going to do is just a quick overview of what happened there. Esther, Jewish woman, beautiful woman of that day, was brought into King Xerxes' house, into his harem. It was not something she did of her own free will. Sometimes we paint it like, oh, she got to be with the king. It's wonderful. It wasn't. She was in a harem. Slavery. But somehow she gained the honor and respect of King Xerxes, and he exalted her to queen. But in all of this, there was a plan that Esther found out about to destroy the entire Jewish nation. And when Esther found out about that, she said, "No way." She submitted her life. She went before the king and said, "If it please you, spare my people." And in the end, her people were spared. The entire Jewish nation would have been annihilated. We wouldn't even have the stories after that. But because Esther, Queen Esther, was willing to give up her entire life, she saved them all. And what kind of story is that? That is a story of submission. And I found out as I was talking to Chrissy that humility and submission are like dance partners. You can't have one without the other. And it's interesting because when you look up those words, as Mark is really good at doing, is looking up the root meanings of these words, humility means to make lowly. Submission means to put under. So they are one. They are one. And there are a few observations from this story of Esther. She submits her life for such a time as this. Because true strength lies in submission to something beyond ourselves. And that's what she was willing to do. Mark had read something in a book with an author last name Forsyth that says, freedom's elder twin brother is humility and submission. I'll say it again. Freedom's elder twin brother is humility and submission. If we want freedom, why do we almost always grab onto control? Why do we almost always exalt ourselves? If freedom comes in humility and submission. I'll go back to that quote from Esther. The virtue of liberation from the tyranny of self is humility and submission. For me, when I was first preaching, I was asked to do a life verse. And at that point in my life, I didn't know if I even had a life verse, but I searched. And at the time, this will give you a little insight on where I was with the Bible. I said Ephesians 5 something. There is no Ephesians 5 anything if you go look at the scriptures. So my boss, the lead pastor, was like, oh, let's go look around for this. I think it's something like be humble and think of others as better than yourself. It's like, oh, Philippians 2:3. That one, that's my favorite verse. I didn't even know where it was. But now I know where it is. So Philippians 2:3 says, be humble, thinking of others is better than yourselves. Don't look out only for your own interests, but take an interest in others too. That's hard. It's very hard to think of others as better than yourself, especially if they've wronged you. I know what I do. I put people in boxes. I put labels on people. They say this thing, oh, you're that. I otherize people so I don't have to get close to them. But I know something about Pilgrim is that the people I know in this church exemplify humility and submission. 2 weeks ago, I had dinner with a group, and I was talking to a man for just a bit. He'd just been put on hospice, struggling. Years. And I spent just a little bit of time with him, and he could have said anything. Now, he did share that he's from Indiana, so that was pretty cool, and a Hoosiers fan. But what he added to that was, I just want to let you know and wonder if you could do anything about it. There's someone in this church that I've been really concerned about. He's having some health issues. And I'm just thinking, like, okay, so you're the guy who's struggling through this, and you're thinking about someone else, and that's the only thing you could think about. When you talk to me, hey, can you do anything about that? Now that's submission to someone else's needs. You know, someone else in this church who has a fatal illness, who gave up a lot of things in her house for the rummage sale recently, when she could have most certainly sold the stuff to help herself. But she didn't do that. And she did it with joy. Now, I've seen countless examples of that kind of selfless love in this church in the 2 years that I've been connected with this body. So what would it look like if we woke up every morning and just said, who am I going to lift above myself? It is not easy. This is not a natural thing. But what if we woke up in the morning and said, who am I going to receive today? Who's going to teach me? I love what Chrissy said when she was standing here to the kids. I can barely get through it. But to look at those kids and say, I can't wait to hear what you're going to teach me. That's powerful. To look at every generation in this room and say, I can't wait to hear what you're going to teach me. To open ourselves up to the stories. I want to open myself up. I want to spend time with Jack Whaley. Well, I didn't expect this. Okay. Reset. I want to spend time with Jack Whaley, and I want to hear his stories. I want to spend time with Ryan. I want to hear his dreams. I want to spend time with Florence and hear her stories. And see the joy that she brings to other people. So true strength is submitting to something that's beyond ourselves. Man, just like get up out of ourselves. Get up out of ourselves. You know, what if we just wake up in the morning, look at the first person we see and just say, I receive your ideas and your dreams and your visions and your hope and your needs today. I am here for you. And why do I speak so much about others? Why does that matter? Because I've heard recently that my submission to others primarily comes from my submission to each. Let me rephrase that. My submission to God primarily comes from my submission to others. It's funny because I oftentimes feel like I've been inconvenienced. When someone else has a need, yet how different would it be if I realized that I was submitting to God when I opened myself up to your story? And who said we had tomorrow? True strength lies in submission to something beyond ourselves. And we're going to take communion together. A story that we all know in this room, a story of true submission to something beyond self. And that's what Christ did, and that's what we're going to remember together. And when we think about Christ submitting himself for the life of the world, I hope we can think about submitting ourselves for the life of the world, for the life of the people in your pew, for the life of the people that will be down there in the friendship hall, for the life of your friends and family, for the life of the stranger. That when we remember Christ submitting his life for us, that we will remember that true submission always lies in something beyond ourselves. Let's pray. God, thank you so much that you gave us the example, the story, that we don't have to feel condemnation in, that we don't have to feel guilty about, but we can just listen to you whisper that you love us that much, that you are for us. And God, that there is no other, there is no outside to be defined in your kingdom on this earth as it is in heaven. In your heavenly, incredible name, amen.